you ever stop to think that many of the thoughts that pop into your mind could be more than just reflections? They can be directions, answers, or even invitations to transform your life. We are often so immersed in the rush of everyday life that we don't realize when God is speaking to us. Through these moments of reflection, He uses thoughts to guide, correct, and inspire us, even in the most common and unexpected situations. In this video, you will discover how God works in subtle, but powerful ways to communicate truths that can change the way you see the world and your own journey. Every teaching you hear here is designed to open your eyes and your mind. But the last, most important of all, could be the thing that makes you completely compensate for your connection with Him. If you believe that your thoughts can carry transformative messages, comment the word "listen" below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that will help you grow in faith and purpose. Let's get started. 1. The voice that emerges in the silence of uncertainty. Have you ever been in a moment where the world around you seemed unbearably noisy, but at the same time, everything inside you cried out for silence? It is in this space, where answers seem unattainable, that something special can happen. Silence is not just the absence of sound, but a place where the unexpected can come to life. Elijah, the prophet who was born kings and enemies, experienced this type of revelation. He found God not in the strong wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in a quiet whisper. In 1 Kings chapter 19 verse 12. It is written that it was in this soft whisper that Elijah saw something greater than himself. But what does this have to do with you? Or, imagine your mind as a big ocean. On stormy days, the waves are high and violent, making it impossible to have a clear view of the depths. But when a storm calms, what was once invisible now appears in all its clarity. Such are the thoughts that God inspires. They do not compete with the noise around us, but become clear when we quiet our interior. This silence is not easy to achieve. We live in a world that values speed, productivity, and constant connection. But God don't shout, He waits. Silence is often uncomfortable because we put ourselves in front of ourselves. Elijah fled into the wilderness not only to escape his enemies, but to deal with his fears and failures. When we are silent, we are faced with the voices that tell us that we are not enough, that we will never be good enough, or that our problems are greater than our strengths. However, it is in this internal confrontation that something extraordinary can happen. We begin to distinguish between the voices that come from ourselves and those that come from God. Remember when Jesus was in the desert for 40 days. He was not surrounded by crowds, miracles, or visible signs. He was in complete solitude, and it was there that He planned the temptations and reaffirmed who He was. The desert was not a place of weakness, but of light. And often, our minds need that kind of wilderness to hear what really matters. Silence is the desert of the soul, where the echoes of distractions dissipate and words that carry life and purpose can finally be heard. Now consider a closer example. Imagine that you are trying to solve an important problem in your life. Maybe a decision that affects your future, or a relationship that seems to be falling apart. You seek advice from friends, read books, watch videos, but nothing seems to bring a breakthrough or clarity. Then, in an unexpected moment of tranquility, an idea emerges. It's not a magic solution, but a thought that seems different from everyone else. It doesn't bring anxiety, but a strange peace. It does not require immediate action, but it does ask for reflection. This idea is often how God begins to guide us. Returning to Elijah's story, what really struck me is that he was exhausted and discouraged. He wanted to give up, yet it was in this weakness that he caught something that renewed his courage. This teaches us something crucial. It is not in our moments of strength that we are most open to listening, but in those when we have nothing left to offer. Weakness, paradoxically, makes room for true strength. The silence of uncertainty is like the emptiness of a blank canvas. It can feel scary, because it forces us to confront the fact that we don't have all the answers, but it is in this space that God can begin to paint something new. In Philippians chapter 4 verse 7, Paul describes a peace that passes all understanding, something that guards our hearts and minds. This peace is not a feeling that appears out of nowhere, but the result of realizing that our thoughts can be guided, even when we are not in the midst of doubts. Therefore, do not be afraid of silence or uncertainty. See them as opportunities for something bigger. Allow yourself to disconnect from the noise, even if for a few minutes. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and simply be present. Sometimes the answer you seek is not thunder that shakes the ground, but a suggestion that echoes in your heart. two ideas that come with peace in the midst of chaos. Have you ever felt like your mind is like a city at rush hour, full of voices, noises, and thoughts rushing into every dangerous situation? This is how internal chaos can overwhelm us in difficult times. However, there are times when, even in the midst of this confusion, an idea emerges that brings peace, a peace that doesn't seem to make sense in the midst of so many problems. This experience can be more than an order. It could be the start of something bigger. Paul, when writing to the Philippians, expressed this peace that passes all understanding. In chapter 4 verse 7, he states that this peace guards our hearts and our minds. It is not a passing feeling, but something that ages like an anchor, even as the waves of chaos try to break us. But how can we identify this peace amidst the whirlwind of daily thoughts and worries? Think of a storm. When the wind blows hard and the waves are choppy, it seems impossible for anything to be calm. However, at the bottom of the ocean, there is calm. The surface may be violent, but at depth, the movement is smooth and constant. This is the peace that God brings to our thoughts. It does not immediately eliminate the chaos around us, but it gives us the ability to stand firm, as if we were anchored in something greater than ourselves. Remember the story of Jesus and the disciples in the boat during the storm, told in Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 to 27. As the boat was tossed by the waves, the disciples became desperate, but Jesus, in peace, slept. When awakened, he simply said, just like the situation, the peace that God brings is not just an emotion, but a force that transforms our perspective and makes us see that the chaos around us does not need to dominate our interior. This peace can come in the form of ideas. Think about how many times you've been faced with a problem that seemed unsolvable, but suddenly something popped into your mind. A decision, a thought, a direction. It could have been something as simple as wait, or as straightforward as do this now. But the difference wasn't just in what you thought, but not how it made you feel. An inexplicable peace accompanied that idea. We are often so used to relying on our own strengths and strategies that we forget to stop and listen. Isaiah in chapter 30 verse 15 writes, "In repentance and rest is a salvation for you. In stillness and trust lies your strength." Resting doesn't mean giving up, but making space for something bigger to happen. And it is in this space that import ideas can emerge, guiding us to where we need to go. Consider the metaphor of a runner in a marathon. At first he runs with energy, driven by adrenaline and passion. But at a certain point, fatigue starts to take over. This is when he needs to adjust his rhythm, listen to his body, and find strengths that seem invisible. This also happens with our mind. When we are exhausted by chaos, there is an opportunity to hear ideas that come not from rushing, but from the calm that can only be found in the midst of trust. Maybe you are living in a situation where everything seems lost. It could be a late bill, a relationship in crisis, or a professional decision that seems impossible to make. And then, a thought appears that contradicts the logic of the world. Trust. This thought does not promise to solve everything immediately, but it brings with it a certainty that you are not alone. This is peace at work, guiding you to act wisely and not desperately. Remember that ideas that bring peace often don't compete with the chaos around us. They look humble, like a small flame in a dark room. However, this flame may be enough to light the way. It's not about solving all the problems at once, but about taking the next step, trusting that each next step will be equally enlightened. Our role is to learn to consider this peace. This requires practice and attention. It requires time of silence, as Jesus did when he retired to pray. It's not about running away from chaos, but finding in it an opportunity to connect with something deeper. When this happens, the ideas that emerge carry a peace that the world cannot offer, but that transforms the way we face any challenge. This peace is not passive. She invites us to act, but wisely. She calls us to make decisions, but without rushing. She reminds us that even in the midst of chaos, there is a safe place for our minds and our hearts. And when we find that place, the ideas that are born there have the power to change everything. 3. The weight of a decision that won't leave your mind. Have you ever found yourself faced with a decision so difficult that it seemed to occupy every corner of your mind? That kind of choice that doesn't allow you to rest, like a constant weight that you carry even when you try to forget it. This kind of situation can be disconcerting, but it can also be the space where something deep is working within you. Often these heavy decisions carry a purpose that goes beyond what we can see. Think of Jonah, a man called to a mission he didn't want to accept. In Jonah chapter 1 verses 1 and 2, God calls him to go to Nineveh, but Jonah decides to flee in the opposite direction. He took a boat to Tarshish, trying to escape not only the responsibility, but also the thoughts that accompanied it. But something curious happens. Even in his escape, he cannot escape the weight of that decision. A storm arises and he knows his choice is at the center of the chaos. Despite his resistance, Jonas is faced with the reality that he cannot ignore what needs to be done. This story of Jonah is more than an account of disobedience. It's a mirror to our own internal struggles. How many times do we know what we need to do, but hesitate out of fear and insecurity, or even because we don't want to face what that choice demands of us? The weight we feel is not a punishment, but a call to reflection. It's a way of reminding ourselves that we are facing something bigger than a simple decision. We are faced with a purpose. Imagine a mind as a battlefield. On one side is fear, doubt, and procrastination. In the other is trust, faith, and truth. This internal conflict is not easy to overcome, but it is where we grow. When Jonah finally accepted his calling and went to Nineveh, he saw something extraordinary happen. The entire city repented and was transformed. The weight of his decision was not on him, but on the impact his obedience would have on other people's lives. However, this process is not always clear to us. There are times when the weight of a decision seems overwhelming because we can't see what's on the other side. It's like a farmer who plants seeds, but has to wait weeks or months to see the first fruits. During this time, he may doubt whether the effort is worth it. But just as the harvest depends on the invisible work beneath the earth, our heavy decisions often bear fruit that we cannot yet see. The Bible gives us another powerful example in Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. In Matthew chapter 26 verses 36 to 44, we see Jesus praying in anguish before facing the cross. He says, the weight of that decision was so great that he even asked that, if possible, he be freed at that moment. However, he also said, Jesus bore the weight of the decision with honesty and courage, showing that even the most difficult moments have a purpose that goes beyond what we can understand. In our lives, these decisions often come with practical dilemmas: a job that requires you to compromise your values, a relationship that needs to be redefined or ended, a change that seems risky but that you feel is necessary. In each of these situations, the weight you feel is not meant to crush you, but to shape you. It is in the midst of this pressure that your priorities are revealed and your faith is strengthened. Think of an old scale where two pans balance weights. When an important decision comes up, it seems that one side weighs more than the other, and we feel inclined to imbalance. But this is when we need to pause and evaluate what really matters. The weight of the decision is often related to the impact it will have, not only on our lives, but on the lives of others. Jonah discovered this in Nineveh. Jesus showed it on the cross, and you will also see it in the choices they make. So, if you feel like a decision won't leave your mind, ask yourself what it's trying to teach you. Is it a call to trust more, to be more courageous, or to leave something behind? The weight you feel can be an opportunity to grow, to transform your life, and to impact other ways that you cannot yet imagine. When Jonah finally embraced his purpose, he not only saw Nineveh transform, but he was transformed. The same could happen to you. The weight of a decision that won't leave your mind is not a meaningless burden, but an invitation to something greater. Accepting it can be difficult, but the fruits that will come from this choice can change everything. Number 4. Persistent thoughts that confront your comfort zone. Have you ever had that thought that just won't go away, like a song that keeps playing in your head? But unlike a pleasant melody, this thought seems to dwell on something you would rather avoid. It could be about a change, a difficult conversation, or a challenge that demands more of you than you're willing to give. These persistent thoughts aren't just annoying. They are often an invitation to step out of your comfort zone and experience something new. Moses is a clear example of someone who was confronted by nagging thoughts. In Exodus chapter 3 verses 1 to 10, he was tending his father-in-law's sheep when he saw a bush burning without being consumed. Moses could have ignored it, but something called him to come closer. And when he heard the voice telling him to return to Egypt and free the people of Israel, his first thought was to retreat. He started listing excuses. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? What if they don't believe me? I don't know how to speak well. Each of these excuses reflected a fear of leaving the comfort of anonymity and facing the responsibility of leadership. How many times do we do the same? When a thought challenges us to try something new or face something difficult, our first thought is to rationalize. This is not for me, I'm not ready, or someone more qualified can do this. But these persistent thoughts don't go away because they're not there to be ignored. They are like waves that keep crashing onto the beach, even when we try to build barriers to contain them. Think of a bird that builds a nest on a tree branch. The nest is safe, cozy, and protects its young. But there comes a time when the puppies need to go out. The mother bird encourages them, even though they resist it. She knows that if they don't get out, they will never learn to fly. In a similar way, God can use these persistent thoughts to lift us from the comfort of our nests and teach us to fly toward the purpose He has for us. Cheers Tarsus, who later became Paul, is another powerful example. In Acts chapter 9 verses 1 to 6, he was persecuting Christians when he was confronted on the road to Damascus. The light that surrounded him caused him to fall, and he heard a voice asking, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" From that moment on, his life changed. He could have ignored that experience, but the persistent thought that I needed to change his direction led him to become one of the greatest apostles. Paulo's journey began when he felt the discomfort of questioning everything he believed to be true. These thoughts do not arise to punish us, but to transform us. Imagine that your mind is like a garden. You can plant beautiful flowers and admire what's already there. But if you're not willing to dig deeper, you'll never discover the nutrients hidden in the soil. These thoughts that disrupt your comfort zone are like gardening tools that invite you to dig deeper, revealing potential you never knew you had. In our practical life, these thoughts can arise in several ways. Maybe you're feeling dissatisfied with your job, but are afraid to look for something new. Maybe you feel like you need to reconnect with someone, but you will have to be eliminated. Or maybe you've been putting off a project, telling yourself it's not the right time yet. These persistent, yet uncomfortable thoughts are signs that there is something bigger waiting for you on the other side of the fear. Jesus also challenged people to step out of their comfort zones. In Matthew chapter 14 verses 22 to 33, Peter saw Jesus walking on the water and asked to come to him. When Jesus called him, Peter took the first step out of the boat, something none of the other disciples had the courage to do. Although Peter was afraid and began to sink, Jesus caught up with him and caught him. What this story teaches us is that growth doesn't happen on the boat. This happens when we have the courage to take the step, even if we falter. Discomfort is part of growing up. Like a seed that needs to break through its hard shell to grow into a plant, we too need to face discomfort to flourish. These persistent thoughts that challenge us are opportunities to break old patterns and discover new possibilities. They may be difficult to accept, but they bring with them the potential for changes we would never have imagined possible. If you're being confronted by a thought that won't go away, maybe it's time to pay attention. This thought could be the beginning of something that will change your life. And just like Moses, Paul, and Peter, you may discover that initial discomfort is just the beginning of a transformative journey. Take the first step, even if it's small. Big changes start with a simple decision to leave your comfortable place and explore the unknown. 5. An idea that suddenly makes you question everyday life. Have you ever had a moment when, in the middle of an ordinary day, an unexpected idea struck you like a bolt of lightning? Something that made you stop, reflect, and think, where did this happen from? It could be a thought that challenges your routine, changes your perspective, or makes you look at life in a completely different way. These sudden ideas are often like little invitations to look beyond the obvious and notice something that was hidden in plain sight. Nehemiah had an experience like this. He was cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, a job of prestige and security in the Persian kingdom. His life was comfortable and predictable until he received news about Jerusalem. In Nehemiah chapter 1 verses 3 and 4, he knew that the city walls were in ruins and something in his heart changed. Nehemiah was not in Jerusalem, but the idea of rebuilding the walls took over his mind so suddenly and intensely that he could not ignore it. That idea of breaking out of his routine led him to start a mission that impacted an entire nation. What happened to Nehemiah teaches us something powerful. Sometimes life-changing ideas don't come from big events, but from simple moments. He was going about his day job when he was confronted with a truth he couldn't ignore. Likewise, in our lives, an idea may come to us in the middle of traffic, while washing the dishes, or in a casual conversation with a friend. These ideas can be the beginning of something that challenges or that we consider normal. Think of routine as a straight, well-paved road. You know every turn, every sign, and every stop. This road represents safety, but it can also be limited. When an idea appears suddenly, it's like an unexpected fork in the road. You can continue on the familiar road, or you can explore this new path without even knowing exactly where it will lead. This choice may seem daunting, but it is in these detours that we find new horizons. Gideon is another example of someone whose life was interrupted by a sudden idea. In Judges chapter 6 verses 11 to 14, Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress, hidden from the Midianites, when an angel appeared and called him the valiant man. Gideon was perplexed. He saw himself as the smallest in his house and his tribe, as the weakest in Israel. But the idea that he could lead and liberate Israel was planted in his mind at that moment. This idea challenged everything he believed about himself, but it also opened the door to something extraordinary. These ideas don't just come to inspire us, they also challenge us. They often ask us to question what we are doing and why. Imagine that your life is like a house. You've lived in it for years, you know every corner and you feel comfortable. But suddenly a crack appears in the wall. This crack is like an idea that forces you to examine the foundation of your home, questioning whether it is still safe. Maybe you realize that you need to renovate or build something new. These sudden ideas may feel uncomfortable, but they have a purpose. When Peter and Andrew were fishing, Jesus called them to be fishers of men. Matthew chapter 4 verse 19. They could have continued their lives as fishermen, but that sudden idea led them to abandon their nets and follow a completely new path. Jesus' call took them out of their everyday lives and put them on a journey that changed history. In practice, these ideas can emerge in several ways. Maybe you're in a job that no longer challenges you, and the thought arises that it's time to look for something different. Maybe you've gotten comfortable in a relationship and suddenly realize you need to invest more time and energy into making it healthy. Or maybe you're following a comfortable routine, but you feel like there's something more to explore, something that's beyond what you see every day. These ideas are like little sensations. They do not immediately show their full potential, but when cared for, they can grow and completely transform your life. Nehemiah didn't know how to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, but he started with prayer. Gideon did not know how he would defeat the Midianites, but he took the first step, trusting that the rest would be revealed along the way. Likewise, you don't need to have all the answers to pursue an idea that challenges your routine. The important thing is to take the first step. These encounters in everyday life are not accidental. They take us out of our comfort zone and make us look at life with new eyes. They show us that there is more to explore, more to learn, and more to live. Then, the next time, an idea will suddenly arise that will make you question your routine. Don't ignore it. It could be the start of something that will transform your journey in ways you never imagined. 6. The memory of someone who needs you now. You've had that moment when, out of nowhere, a person's face appears in your mind. Maybe someone you haven't talked to in years, or even someone you see often but have never given much thought to their struggles. This memory, often unexpected, can be a sign for you to stop, reflect, and think. It can be an opportunity for you to make a difference in someone's life, even if the gesture seems small. In Acts chapter 10 verses 9 to 20, Peter had an experience like this. As he prayed on the roof, he had a vision that prepared him to meet Cornelius, a man seeking spiritual answers. Cornelius also received guidance to call Peter. The connection between the two was not accidental. It was a reminder to Peter that his mission went beyond the boundaries he knew. This episode shows how a memory can be the beginning of something transformative, both for those who are remembered and for those who take the initiative. Sometimes these memories come in quiet moments, but often, they come in the midst of the hustle and bustle of the day. It's as if, in the midst of the chaos, a name or a face appears in our minds, demanding attention. These memories can be compared to small sparks that, if ignored, turn off, but, if fed, can turn into a flame that warms and illuminates. Think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, narrated in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. The priest and the Levite passed by the injured man on the side of the road, but they did not stop. Maybe they were busy or simply ignored the urge to help. The Samaritan, on the other hand, not only stopped but also tended to the injured man, going above and beyond what was expected. This story teaches us that acting in response to a memory or impulse can help change someone's life, and ours too. These memories may be accompanied by a feeling of urgency or, sometimes, discomfort that does not go away. Imagine your mind is like a room full of people talking. In the middle of this, a voice starts calling someone's name. At first you may ignore it, but as the voice continues, you realize it demands your attention. This insistence is an invitation for you to do something that perhaps only you can do. In everyday life, this can manifest itself in many ways. You may be working, driving, or even relaxing, and suddenly you remember a friend who is facing difficulties. Maybe it's someone who has lost a loved one, is going through a financial problem, or simply needs a word of encouragement. This memory is like a notification in your heart, asking you to take action. Consider the example of Job. In the midst of his suffering, 3 friends came to console him. John 2:11-13. Although I failed to fully understand his pain, simply being present with him was meaningful. Sometimes we don't know what to say or do when we remember someone, but our presence and willingness to listen may be all the person needs. These memories can also teach us about empathy. They take us away from our personal focus and away from connecting with the needs of others. Jesus, even in the midst of crowds, always noticed individual people. He stopped to speak to the woman who touched his clothes, Mark chapter 5 verses 25-34, and to restore the sight of Bartimaeus, who cried out for mercy, Mark chapter 10 verses 46-52. These stories that show us that we pay attention to whoever appears in our minds can open doors to gestures of love that transform lives. Imagine a stone thrown into a peaceful lake. The initial impact creates ripples that spread across the entire surface. So are the gestures we make in response to these memories. A simple message, a phone call, or even a prayer can create a domino effect, reaching places you never imagined. Maybe that person needs a word of encouragement, or maybe your action is a response to something they were silently asking for. Don't underestimate the power of acting on these memories. Sometimes what seems small to us can be exactly what someone needs to get through a difficult day or take a step toward change. When Peter went to Cornelius, he didn't just bring a message, but he opened the door to the salvation of an entire house. The impact of an action based on a memory can be greater than we imagine, so the next time someone's name or face pops into your mind, pay attention. It may be a call for you to act, for you to be the answer that person needs. Whether through a simple gesture or something bigger, remember that these opportunities are unique moments to convey love, compassion, and care. Acting on these memories can change not only the life of those who are remembered, but also yours. 7. The weight in your heart for something you are ignoring. There are moments in life when we feel a weight in our hearts that we cannot explain. It's that nagging feeling that persists, even when we try distractions to make it go away. This feeling is often a call to deal with something we ignore, a responsibility, a necessary correction, or even an opportunity for change that we are hesitating to accept. The story of King David in 2 Samuel chapter 12 verses 1-7 is a powerful example of this kind of weight. After committing adultery with Bathsheba and orchestrating Uriah's death, David tried to carry on with his life as if nothing had happened, but the weight of his choices accompanied him. When the prophet Nathan came to him, using a parable about a rich man who stole a poor man's only sheep, David was finally confronted with a truth that weight in his heart was an invitation to repentance, something he could no longer ignore. This heaviness in the heart can be compared to a stone in our shoes. At first it is just a mild discomfort, but as we continue walking, the discomfort increases until it becomes impossible to ignore. Trying to move forward without dealing with what bothers us only makes the situation worse, both emotionally and spiritually. Jonas also wanted that kind of weight. When he was called to go to Nineveh, he fled in the opposite direction. In Jonah chapter 1 verse 3, he boards a ship for Tarshish, but the weight of his disobedience moves him. A violent storm put the lives of everyone on board at risk, and Jonas knew he was responsible. Even in his attempt to escape, he could not ignore the call to face what he was avoiding. In everyday life, this weight can manifest itself in many ways. It could be a difficult conversation you've been putting off, a decision you need to make, or even a commitment you know you need to make but keep procrastinating. These moments are not just inconvenient, they are opportunities for growth. Dealing with what we ignore can be uncomfortable, but it is essential for our inner peace and spiritual progress. Jesus spoke about the danger of ignoring what is important in the parable of the evil and negligent servant. In Matthew chapter 25 verses 24-28, this servant, instead of investing the talent entrusted to him, buried it, choosing the path, security, and inertia. When the Lord returned, he was confronted with his negligence. The lesson is clear. Ignoring our responsibilities and opportunities does not exempt us from their consequences. Heaviness in our hearts can be a way of remembering our priorities. Imagine that your mind is like a scale. When something is out of balance, be it a neglected relationship, an unfinished task, or a postponed decision, the scales tip, creating internal discomfort. This discomfort is an invitation to correct a balance, even if it requires effort and courage. In practice, dealing with this weight starts with honesty. You have to admit that something is wrong and seek wisdom to understand how to act. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 12 verse 2 exhorts us not to conform to this world, but to transform our minds to discern what is good, pleasant, and perfect. This discernment begins when we stop running away and face what bothers us. Dealing with what we are ignoring also requires humility. David needed to hear Nathan's rebuke to see his mistakes and seek forgiveness. Sometimes we need people around us to help us identify what we avoid and encourage us to face it with courage. Other times, it is in the silence of prayer and reading the scriptures that we find clarity to act. This weight in the heart is not a punishment, but an invitation to something better. It's a reminder that there is something in your life that needs attention, something that may be stealing your peace and blocking your growth. Like a plant that needs pruning to grow stronger. You can also use these moments to remove what hinders your development and embrace what really matters. If you're feeling this weight right now, don't ignore it. Stop, reflect, and ask yourself questions. What am I avoiding? What needs to be adjusted or resolved? Facing these issues may not be easy, but it is in this process that we find a problem and, often, a new beginning. Remember that by dealing with what is in your heart, you not only remove the weight, but you also make room for peace, growth, and purpose on your journey. 8. The enchantment of something that transforms your purpose. Sometimes, in the middle of our routine, something catches our attention in an inexplicable way. It could be an idea, an interest, or even an unexpected encounter that seems to light a fire within us. This kind of charm is like a spark that transforms what once seemed ordinary into something extraordinary. More than a simple interest, it can be the starting point for a significant change of purpose. Paul, who was previously known as Saul, had a moment like this. In Acts chapter 9 verses 3 to 6, we read about his journey on the road to Damascus. Saul was a fierce persecutor of Christians, but halfway through he was stopped by a bright light and a voice that questioned him. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" At that moment, it wasn't just an interruption, it was a watershed moment that was completely transformed on purpose. He went from persecutor to apostle, someone who dedicated his life to spreading the message he fought before. This enchantment for something that transforms our purpose can begin in unexpected ways. Sometimes, it comes as a curiosity that we can't ignore. Imagine Moses in front of the burning bush. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 2 to 4, the bush burned without being consumed, and Moses was attracted to that audience. He could have continued on his path, but he chose to reach out, and in doing so, he picked up a calling that changed not only his life, but also the history of an entire nation. These experiences show us that, often, what awakens something within us is not a grand event, but something simple that captures our attention. It's like a drop of water repeatedly falling on a stone. At first, it seems insignificant, but over time, it can shape the stone. So, these charms may seem small at first, but they have the power to completely transform our path. Think about someone who discovers a passion for helping others. At first, it could be something as simple as volunteering for a local project. But over time, this passion grows and turns into a greater purpose, such as working with humanitarian causes or even changing careers to impact lives. These changes start with a spark, something that inspires us and challenges us to see the world in a new way. However, being enchanted by something that transforms our purpose is not always comfortable. It often demands that we leave behind what we know. Abraham, in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 4, was called to leave his land, his relatives, and go to a place that God would show him. He didn't have all the answers, but he was driven by a promise and a vision of something greater. This calling took him out of his comfort zone and set him on a journey that changed not only his life, but also the lives of future generations. These moments of wonder can make us question who we are and what really matters. Imagine your life is like a painting. For a long time you've dedicated yourself to filling a specific type of image, but suddenly you realize there's something completely different than you could create. This moment of realization is both a challenge and an opportunity. He invites us to reimagine our history and consider new possibilities. In practice, this may mean hearing a call to serve in an area we have never considered before. It could be starting a project, going back to school, changing careers, or even investing in relationships in a more intentional way. Whatever form this enchantment takes, it is always accompanied by a renewing sense of purpose. It prompts us to ask, how can I make a difference? Or what can I offer that is really important? Jesus often awakened this type of transformation in his followers. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishing when Jesus called them to be fishers of men. Matthew chapter 4 verses 18 to 20. They left their nets immediately, because something in that moment cold enchanted them and made them see beyond the daily routine. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew they were being called to something greater. If you've ever felt that kind of enchantment, that impulse that awakens a new vision for your life, don't ignore it. It could be the start of something that will transform not just what you do, but who you are. These moments are not coincidental. They are opportunities to realign our lives with something that has more meaning. Like a compass that adjusts its direction, this charm can take us where we need to be. Even if the path seems right at first, embrace it and be willing to explore where it can take you. 9. A strange feeling of being in the right place at the right time. I've had that feeling that, no matter how random everything seemed, you were exactly where you were supposed to be. Maybe it was an unexpected encounter, a word someone said, or even a simple gesture that triggered something bigger. This strange yet powerful feeling of being in the right place at the right time is no accident. Often, it is a unique opportunity to notice something bigger happening in your life. Esther, in the book that bears her name, is a perfect example of this. She was a young orphan who, against all odds, became queen of Persia. When the Jewish people faced a threat of annihilation, Esther was faced with a choice, risking her life to intercede with the king or remain silent. His cousin, Mordecai, in Esther chapter 4 verse 14, said something profound. Who knows, maybe it was for a moment like this that you reached a position of queen. That phrase wasn't just a reminder, it was a call. Esther realized she was in the right place, at the right time, to fulfill a greater purpose. This kind of moment can be compared to pieces of a puzzle. For a long time, you may not understand how each piece fits together, but suddenly something happens that connects everything. You realize that the choices, encounters, and even challenges that arose prepared you for that exact moment. Just like stir, these graces activate the courage and faith to act. Another example is Joseph, son of Jacob, sold into slavery by his brothers. He spent years facing injustice and challenges in Egypt. However, in Genesis chapter 45 verse 5, when he finally finds his brothers again, Joseph says, "For it was to save lives that God envied me before you." Discovered that all the seemingly disconnected situations put him in the right place to save not only his family, but many other people. These moments of being in the right place often don't come without a fight. Imagine your life is like a winding river. Sometimes you face currents, rocks, and even unexpected detours. However, each turn takes you to a specific point. When you look back, you realize that the difficult path prepared you to face what is before you now. It is in this context that the feeling of being in the right place takes on meaning. You see how the past and present connect in everyday life. These moments can arise simply. Maybe you're in line at the grocery store, and maybe you start a conversation with someone who needs help. Or perhaps, in your work, the opportunity arises to lead a project that challenges your skills, but also shows the impact you can have. These situations seem small at first glance, but when you reflect, you realize that they can have a greater meaning. The parable of the Good Samaritan, narrated in Luke chapter 10 verses 30 to 37, teaches us something important about this. The Samaritan didn't plan on finding an injured man on the side of the road, but when faced with that situation, I could act first. He wasn't in the right place at the right time to make a difference in that man's life, and his choice resonated as an eternal example of compassion. These graces also challenge us to step out of our comfort zone. Esther could have chosen to remain silent and save her own life, but she decided to risk everything. Joseph could have held a grudge against his brothers, but he chose to forgive and act for their good. The Good Samaritan could have continued on his way, but he chose to stop. These choices show that being in the right place is not just about realizing the opportunity, but about acting with courage and determination. Think of your life as a book being written. Each chapter feels separate, but in the end, they all connect to tell a larger story. The moments when you feel like you're in the right place at the right time are like turning points in this narrative. They show us that, even in the midst of confusion or the unknown, there is something being built. These sensations are reminders that our lives are not a set of random events. They invite us to trust that even when we don't understand everything, we are being guided. And when those moments come, They give us the opportunity to make choices that not only impact our lives, but also the lives of those around us. The next time you feel this strange certainty that you are where you are supposed to be, pay attention. It could be the start of something bigger, like Esther and the Good Samaritan. You may find that your presence in that moment is a response to a need, a call to action, or a reminder that each part of your journey has a purpose. Embrace this feeling and be ready to make a difference wherever you are. 10. The irrational truth that overcomes fear. Some decisions in life don't make sense at first glance. They challenge our logic, our comfort zone, and even our deepest fears. Yet, within us, there is a truth so strong that it overcomes any doubt. This feeling may seem irrational to those who see it from the outside, but to those who feel it, it is like a flame that cannot be extinguished. Joshua is a classic example of this truth. When he assumed leadership of the people of Israel after the death of Moses, he faced an enormous challenge, leading an entire nation to conquer the promised land. In Joshua chapter 1 verse 9, God said, this promise was the basis of Joshua's courage. Even when logic said he was just a man leading a people in a land full of enemies, his truth kept him moving forward. This irrational truth can be compared to a bridge spanning an abyss. When you look at it, it looks fragile, like it isn't able to support its weight. But as she takes the first step, she realizes that she is stronger than she imagined. The fear does not disappear immediately, but it is overcome by the confidence that each step or progress brings us closer to the other side. Another powerful example is David facing Goliath. In 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 45, David declared, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts. This phrase reveals a truth that makes no sense to human eyes. David was young, inexperienced and armed only with a base and some stones. But he had something Goliath didn't have, the certainty that he was fighting for something bigger than himself. This discovery often challenges us to go against what the world considers normal. Imagine that you are a boat sailing on a rough sea. Waves of fear and doubt try to pull you off course, but an internal compass keeps you on track. This compass is the truth that guides your steps, even when the scenario around you is uncertain. In everyday life, these situations can arise in several ways. Maybe you feel like you need to leave a stable job to pursue a dream that seems impossible. Or perhaps you are facing a challenging medical diagnosis and despite your circumstances, you feel an inexplicable peace that has encouraged you to fight on. This truth may not make sense to others, but it is real to you, like an inner voice that cannot be ignored. Peter also experienced this truth when he asked Jesus to let him walk on the water. In Matthew chapter 14 verses 28 to 30, Peter got out of the boat and began to walk. He was doing something that defied all laws of physics. However, while his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he overcame his fear and did the impossible. When I started to doubt, it sank. But his experience shows that the truth, even if momentary, can take us to places we never imagined. This truth does not eliminate fear, but it puts it into perspective. It's like climbing a mountain. The fear of falling is always present, but the determination to reach the top is greater. This mix of fear and courage is what drives us to move forward, even when the path seems uncertain. In practice, living with this truth requires a step of faith. This doesn't mean acting irresponsibly, but trusting that if you are being called to something, there is a greater reason for it. Abram, who later became Abraham, received a call to leave his homeland and go to an unknown place. In Genesis, chapter 12 verse 1, he left without knowing exactly where he was going. This decision defied all logic, but Abraham continued, because he upheld the promise he had received. These moments of truth also teach us something important about trust. We won't always see the full picture before taking action. Clarity often comes along the way, not at the starting point, like a lighthouse that shines just a few meters ahead. This truth gives us enough light to take the next step, even if we can't see the entire path. If you feel this truth today, something that overcomes fear and defies your logic, don't ignore it. It could be the beginning of a journey that will change your life and impact those around you. Just like Joshua, David, and Peter, you can discover that the impossible becomes possible when you decide to trust and act based on this certainty that pulses within you. 11 dreams that become recurring ideas. There are times when dreams stop being just disconnected images of the mind and simply make us reflect deeply. Some dreams have the power to repeat themselves in our thoughts, even after we wake up, as if they were reminders of something we cannot ignore. They remain in our minds, becoming recurring ideas that challenge us to act, to change, or to seek answers. Joseph, the son of Jacob, is a classic example of how dreams can shape purpose. In Genesis chapter 37, verses 5 to 11, he had two dreams that suggested he would have a position of leadership, to the point where his own brothers would bow down to him. These dreams were not well received by his family, but could not ignore them. Were like seeds planted in his heart, which over many years in difficult situations turned into reality. Not only did Joseph become governor of Egypt, but he used his position to save his family and many others from starvation. Dreams are powerful metaphors. Imagine that your mind is like a blank canvas, and dreams are brushstrokes that begin to form an image. At first, you may not understand what is being painted, but as time passes, each stroke gains meaning. They can be inspirations, visions of possibilities, or even messages that challenge our understanding. Daniel also played an important role in interpreting life-changing dreams. In Daniel chapter 2 verses 20 and 7 to 30, he interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, something no one else has been able to do. This episode not only highlighted Daniel's wisdom, but also showed how dreams can carry deep meanings that disable attention and discernment. Like Daniel, we are called to reflect on what these dreams may be conveying to us in everyday life. Dreams can appear not only while we sleep, but also as ideas that visit us repeatedly, asking for our attention. Maybe you dream of changing careers, starting a project, or impacting your community in some way. These dreams persist because they have a purpose. They are like a melody that keeps playing in your mind, even when you try to ignore it. Think of a farmer who receives rare seeds. He could ignore them, leaving them aside, or he could plant them, water them, and tend them until they turned into a bountiful harvest. So are these recurring dreams and ideas in our lives. If we choose to care for them, they can flourish and bring results we never imagined. Dreams also challenge our fear and our comfort zone. Joseph was sold into slavery, unjustly accused and forgotten in prison before his dreams came true. This difficult path could have made him give up, but he continued to believe in what he had received. Her story reminds us that dreams often take us on unexpected journeys, but these journeys are part of the process of growth and fulfillment. When Jesus spoke in parables, he often used simple imagery to convey profound truths. In Mark chapter 4 verses 26 to 29, he tells the parable of the growth of the seed, where the sower plants and the earth itself produces the fruit, first the plant, then the ear, and finally, the full grain. This parable reflects the process of how ideas and dreams develop in our lives. They start small, but with time and proper care, they grow into something significant. In everyday life, recurring dreams and ideas can manifest themselves as a restlessness that drives us to act. Maybe you feel a constant desire to help other people, even if you don't know how to start. Or maybe you have a clear vision of something you want to build, but don't hesitate to take the first step. These ideas are not accidental. They are invitations to explore new paths and take on new challenges. It is important to remember that these dreams and ideas do not come true on their own. They turned off action, courage, and perseverance. Just as Joseph worked faithfully through every situation that arose, we need to be willing to act diligently, even when the path seems uncertain. The Apostle Paul, in Philippians chapter 3 verse 14 wrote, "I press on toward the goal to win the prize of the calling to which I was called in Christ." This verse encourages us to keep moving forward, even when we don't see the whole picture. If you have dreams that keep coming back to you, don't ignore them. Reflect on them, pray, and seek discernment. They could be the start of something that will transform your life and impact others around you. Just like in Daniel, you may discover that these dreams are much more than just thoughts. They are a journey waiting to begin. Number 12. When your thoughts change your priorities. There are times when something in our mind seems to change. The things that used to be at the top of our priority list begin to lose their power, while others start to have a greater weight. This change does not happen by chance. It is often the result of a deep internal process, where we are led to reevaluate what really matters and redirect our focus to what has the most meaning. The Apostle Paul is a classic example of someone whose priorities were completely transformed. Before his conversion, he was a zealous Pharisee, fervently persecuting Christians, believing he was doing what was right. However, in Acts chapter 9 verses 3 to 6, his journey on the road to Damascus changed everything. After encountering Jesus, his vision was literally dimmed, but it was his spiritual vision that was truly transformed. He went from persecutor to proclaimer of the gospel, dedicating his life to something he previously considered wrong. Your story shows us that when our thoughts change, our priorities change too. This transformation can be compared to a traveler carrying a backpack full of stones. During a journey, he realizes that he is tired and decides to empty his load. In doing so, he discovers that some stones were completely unnecessary, while others had a value he hadn't recognized before. So are our thoughts and priorities. Sometimes we carry things that weigh more than they should, while ignoring what really matters. Jesus spoke directly about priority changes in Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. This verse challenges us to put the essentials first, trusting that other needs will be met. This shift in focus takes courage, because we are often so attached to our old priorities that we are afraid to let them go. In everyday life, these changes can be subtle or abrupt. Maybe you are working hard to achieve a promotion at work, but suddenly you realize that you are neglecting your family. Or maybe you're investing time in something that doesn't bring true satisfaction, while it's an opportunity to serve or create something meaningful right on your doorstep. These moments of reflection are not exclusive. They are invitations to reevaluate what really deserves your time and energy. The parable of the hidden treasure, in Matthew chapter 13 verse 44, illustrates this brilliantly. Jesus tells about a man who, when he finds treasure in a field, sells everything he has to buy it. Treasure represents something of incomparable value, something worth sacrificing all other things for. This man does not regret what he lost, because what he gains is infinitely more valuable. So when our thoughts change our priorities, we are not simply giving up something, we are investing in something bigger. These changes, however, are not always simple. They can be accompanied by doubts and internal conflicts. Think about Martha and Mary, in the story told in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. Martha was busy with preparations, while Mary chose to listen to Jesus' teachings. Martha complained, but Jesus responded, "Maria chose the best part, and it will not be taken away." This story reminds us that while our responsibilities are important, we need to discern what deserves our priority attention. These shifts in thinking can also lead us to act more generously and altruistically. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, had his priorities transformed after meeting Jesus. In Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10, he pledged to return what had been taken unjustly and to give half of his possessions to the poor. This decision was not forced. It was a natural response to the transformation that occurred in his mind and heart. In practice, these changes begin with a simple moment of reflection. Ask yourself, is what I'm prioritizing right now really important? Am I investing my time and energy in the right things? This type of questioning can be uncomfortable, but it is essential to align our actions with what really has value. These priority shifts don't just transform our lives, but they also impact those around us. When Paul changed his priorities, he not only found a new purpose, but he also touched countless people's lives with his preaching, his letters, and his dedication. When you realign your thoughts and priorities, you may discover that the impact of your choices goes far beyond what you imagine. If you feel like your thoughts are changing your priorities, listen to that inner voice. It can be a call to let go of what is fleeting and embrace what is eternal. Just like Paul, the man in the parable, and so many other examples, you may discover that these changes are not losses, but steps towards something much greater. Number 13. The direction hidden in small everyday details. Have you ever seen how small everyday details can sometimes seem more important than they appear? A casual comment, an unexpected encounter, or even something seemingly trivial, like a phrase heard on the street, can bring you a direction you didn't even know you were looking for. Often it is in the details that we find the answers we were looking for. Powerful example of this is in the story of Ruti in the book that bears her name. Ruti, a Moabite, decided to accompany her mother-in-law Naomi back to Bethlehem after the death of her husbands. In Ruti chapter 2, verses 2 to 3, Ruth went to work in the fields to gather grain, and apparently by chance, she ended up in the field of Bosh, a relative of Naomi. This detail, which seemed insignificant, was the starting point for a complete transformation in Ruth's life. From that encounter, she not only found provision, but also a future. The small details of everyday life can be compared to pieces of a puzzle. Individually, they may seem insignificant or disconnected, but when put together, we reveal a bigger picture. What Ruth saw as an ordinary day at work was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. Another example is in the story of Naaman, a commander in the Syrian army. He suffered from leprosy and was cured in a way that defied all his expectations. In 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 9 to 13, the prophet Elisha told him to wash 7 times in the Jordan River to be healed. Naaman initially rejected the instruction as too simple, but upon obeying, she was completely restored. The simplicity of this action was what brought about the transformation he was looking for. These examples show how details can contain big lessons. It's like a golden thread in an ordinary fabric. At first glance, it may seem like just another detail, but when you look closer, you realize that it gives shine and meaning to the whole. These moments are opportunities to notice the extraordinary in the midst of the ordinary. In everyday life, these common things can arise in many ways. Maybe you're in a casual conversation with a coworker, and they mention something that sparks an idea in you. Or maybe you're reading a book and a specific sentence seems to jump off the page, as if it were written directly for your situation. These details may seem random, but they are often subtle guidance that points a way. Jesus often used parables to teach how small things matter greatly. In Matthew chapter 13 verse 31, he talked about the mustard seed, which is the smallest of seeds, but grows to become one of the largest trees. This parable teaches us that we should not underestimate the power of small beginnings or details that seem insignificant. These teachings and small details also teach us about attention and sensitivity. We are often so focused on big goals or problems that we fail to notice the answers that are right in front of us. It's like looking for a lost key while it's in your pocket. Being present in the moment and paying attention to the details of everyday life can open our eyes to paths we never considered. The story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24 verses 13 to 35 illustrates this beautifully. They were discouraged after Jesus' crucifixion, and an unknown traveler joined them on the way. During the walk, he explained the scriptures, and when he finally revealed himself by breaking the bread, they realized he was Jesus. The detail of the broken bread was what opened his eyes to the truth. This story shows us that everyday details often carry answers we were looking for. In practice, understanding the small details requires an attentive heart and an open mind. Start observing more. Reflect on the conversations, unexpected opportunities, and even challenges that arise in your day. Ask yourself, what could this be showing me? Is there something here I'm overlooking? These small lessons also teach us to value every moment. Just as Ruth gathered ears of corn that were discreetly small and unimportant, you too can find victories and opportunities in simpler places. The important thing is not to underestimate the power of the common. Sometimes the greatest results result from actions or moments that, at first glance, seem insignificant. If you feel like something in your daily life is catching your attention, even if it seems small, don't ignore it. It could be a missing piece of the puzzle of your life. Just like Ruth, Naaman, and the disciples on the road to Emmaus, you may discover that the answers you seek are hidden in the details you almost missed. Be attentive, be present, and be willing to see the extraordinary in the midst of the ordinary. 14. Awakening to a truth that has always been there, in front of you. Have you ever had a moment when something that has always been in front of you finally made sense? It's like a curtain is pulled back, revealing something you already knew but never fully understood. This type of awakening can be a turning point, an opportunity to see life with new eyes and discover truths that transform our way of thinking and acting. Jesus' disciples experienced this in a remarkable way. In Luke chapter 24 verses 13 to 35, 2 of them were on the road to Emmaus discussing the recent events of the crucifixion. Jesus joined them, but they took no notice. During a conversation, he explained the scriptures, revealing how everything pointed to him. It was only when Jesus broke the bread that their eyes were opened and they realized who he was. The truth had been in front of them the entire time, but it was in that instant that it completely revealed itself. This experience can be compared to putting on glasses for the first time. Before, you saw the world in a blurred way, without being clear. But when you put on the glasses, everything becomes clear. Notice details that were there all along, but that you couldn't see clearly. So is the awakening to a truth that has always been before us. It's not that it came out of nowhere, it's that now we're ready to see it. Another example is in the life of Jacob, in Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 to 17. Jacob had a dream while sleeping in the desert. He saw a ladder reaching to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. When he awoke, he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." Jacob not only saw the presence of God in that place, but he began to understand that his journey had a greater purpose. This revelation changed his perspective and marked the beginning of a transformation in his life. These awakenings often happen in moments of reflection or in situations that take us out of automatic mode. Imagine that you are walking along a familiar path every day, but at a certain point you decide to stop and look around. Suddenly, we notice details that had never been noticed before: a flower growing on the sidewalk, the sound of birds chirping, or the way sunlight passes through the leaves of the trees. These moments of pause allow us to see what has always been there, but which the rush prevents us from noticing. In everyday life, this type of awakening can happen in simple situations. Perhaps you are facing a challenge at work or in a relationship, and after conversation or reflection you realize that the solution was in front of you all along. Or perhaps you are reading a passage of scripture that you have read countless times, but this time something jumps out at you and brings a new understanding that completely changes your perspective. Jesus often used parables to help people awaken to truths that were before them. In Matthew chapter 13 verse 44, he bypassed the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. A man, upon finding the treasure, sold everything he had to buy it. The treasure was always in the field, but it was only when the man discovered that his life was transformed. This story teaches us that what we are looking for is often already present. We just need to have eyes to see it. These moments of awakening also challenged us to change. When we perceive a truth, we are called to act in accordance with it. Peter, in Acts chapter 2 verse 37, preached on the day of Pentecost, and his listeners were pricked in their hearts as they understood who Jesus was. This realization led them to ask, "What will we do?" The truth is, they considered the profile of a response, and they were ready to act. These awakenings don't just happen at big moments. They are also in the small details of everyday life. In a conversation, in an experience, or even in silence. The key is to be aware and open. It's like a puzzle that suddenly starts to make sense when the right piece fits together. What once seemed confusing now reveals a clear picture. If you feel like something is being revealed to you, a truth that has always been before your eyes, but that you can now see, embrace that moment. It can be an opportunity to grow, to change, and to align your life with what really matters. Just like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, Jacob in the desert, and the man who found the treasure in the field. You may discover that the truth that transforms your life has always been closer than you imagined. Number 15. The thought that invites surrender, even without guarantees. There are times when we are confronted by a thought that challenges us deeply. It does not provide all the answers, nor does it offer guarantees that everything will work out, but it comes with such clear strength that it invites us to trust and surrender, even when the future seems uncertain. This type of thinking is often a call to let go of control and walk in faith. Abraham, in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 4, is a striking example of this surrender. He was called to leave his land, his relatives, and his father's house to go to a land that God would show him. He didn't know exactly where he was going, nor what the path would be like, but he chose to trust. This thought of leaving, even without guarantees, is a deep faith and a total surrender. Abraham gave up the comforts of his known life to embrace the unknown, driven by the promise of something greater. This experience can be compared to sailing in a boat amidst the clouds. You can't see what's ahead, but you feel like you need to keep remaining. Each row is an act of trust, believing that, although you don't see the destination, there is a purpose on the path. This is the interpretation. It moves us to act, even when we don't fully understand what's coming. A powerful example is Jesus in the other Garden of Gethsemane. In Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 to 42, we see Jesus praying in deep anguish, knowing what he was about to face. He asked, "My Father, if it is possible, to keep this cup away from me. However, not as I want, but as you want." This moment of surrender shows that even in the midst of uncertainty and suffering, Jesus chose to trust in the greater purpose that was before him. His surrender was not passive. It was an act of obedience, These thoughts that invite us to surrender often challenge us because they ask us to let go of control. Imagine that your life is like a backpack full of rocks. Each stone represents your worries, fears, and desires for control. Surrender is like letting go of that backpack, trusting that you will be guided even if you don't know exactly how or where. This choice may seem scary at first, but it brings with it a freedom that is only found when we let go of what weighs us down. In everyday life, these moments can arise unexpectedly. Perhaps you are facing an important decision, such as moving to another city, accepting a new job, or even consolidating a relationship. The thought that invites surrender may not bring guarantees that everything will be easy, but it brings a peace that defies logic. This peace is like a lighthouse in the darkness, guiding you to take the next step. The parable of the prodigal son, in Luke chapter 15 verses 11 to 32, also illustrates this idea. The youngest son made an impulsive decision to leave home with his inheritance, but when he lost everything, he was faced with a thought that led him to surrender, to return home, even without knowing how he would be received. He had no guarantee his father would accept him, but his surrender led him to experience a love and forgiveness he hadn't expected. These thoughts also show us that surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. They challenge our conviction that we do not have all the answers, but we can trust in the one who knows the way. Peter, when called by Jesus to cast the nets again, after a whole night without fishing, replied, "Because you say that, I will cast the nets." Luke chapter 5 verse 5. He chose to obey, even though he didn't fully understand, and was observed by a bountiful catch. Surrender also teaches us about patience and perseverance. The results are not always immediate. Abraham waited years for the promise of having a son to come true. Joseph, before seeing his dreams come true, was destroyed, enslaved, and imprisoned. These stories show us that interpretation is not a guarantee that the path will be easy, but it is a commitment to trust in the process, even when the results seem distant. If you are being confronted by a thought that calls you to surrender, know that this call is an opportunity to grow, to trust, and to experience something greater than you can imagine. Just like Abraham, Jesus, and so many others, your surrender can be the beginning of a journey that will change your life and impact those around you. Choose to trust, even without all the guarantees, and discover what is in store for you along the way. Thank you very much for watching until the end of this video. Knowing that you took this time to reflect on how God speaks to you through your thoughts is very special. If you've made it this far, write the phrase, "I'm learning to hear God in my thoughts," in the comments. I'll love knowing that you follow all the content. Take the opportunity now to continue on this journey by watching the 2 videos that are appearing on the screen. They were created with the same purpose, to help people in difficult times and to bring teachings that make a difference for any age. Each video has something special that can strengthen your faith and inspire you to face life's challenges. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any content. We are here to walk together, bringing words of hope and direction. May you continue to find strength and clarity in each step.